Health Minister Zweli Mkhize is expected to brief the media tonight on phase 2 of the COVID-19 vaccination rollout. The government has been criticised for a lack of proper planning during the first phase that covered healthcare workers. We've seen thousands queuing to get the jab and confusion over who should be vaccinated first. We've only so far, in fact, seen a trial rollout of the Johnson & Johnson jab. That was due to complications raised when the AstraZeneca jab had to be set aside in South Africa due to reduced efficacy as a result of that COVID-19 variant that was first identified in the country late last year. So Fatima Hassan is founder of the Health Justice Initiative. She's joining us now to speak about some of the expectations there. Fatima, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. What is top of mind for you as the country prepares to vaccinate the over 60s from Monday?
Thanks. I think really overdue, but I am worried that the pace at which we're vaccinating is not going to be sufficient to be able to take us out of this pandemic. The key concern is that we don't have enough supplies. From what we've been told, less than 500,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine has actually landed in South Africa. Johnson & Johnson supplies have actually not arrived in South Africa. We need to vaccinate millions of people. So the key concern right now is the limited supplies and the drip feed of supplies that are coming in from these pharmaceutical vaccine manufacturers. And of course, the second issue, given the conclusion of the Sisonke trial and what we believe is a very low uptake of these vaccines, is a key concern in South Africa around vaccine hesitancy.
And one of the things you're calling for, in line with what you've raised with the drips and drabs as far as the arrival of vaccine doses, is that you're saying the healthcare sector as a whole needs to put pressure on manufacturers, in particular private practice. Why? So the concern around the limited amount of supplies that are actually coming into South Africa and the rest of the global south is due to a situation of self-created scarcity. So if we need to vaccinate 20 million people, within the next few months, the rate at which it's forecasted for supplies to be actually coming into South Africa means that our vaccination program is going to take very long. In fact, government has admitted that we will be continuing vaccination up until 2022. There's still some unanswered questions around why our government refuses to take further action against the pharmaceutical companies in the form of compulsory licenses. We still have to negotiate the TRIPS waiver. But the key concern with the Pfizer vaccine that have landed in South Africa and that are due to be administered to people who are over 80 and then presumably people who are over 60 with comorbidities in the next few weeks is that it is a 2-dose vaccine. It does require ultra-cold storage. We were led to believe that these vaccines were earmarked for urban centers. So the question mark around the delay in the arrival of the Johnson & Johnson supplies is, what does this then mean for vaccinating elderly people in what are called rural areas or areas that don't have those cold storage facilities? The second question we need to make sure that we address and that people actually understand, particularly people who are over 80, is that if they go and receive the Pfizer vaccine, they need to go for a follow-up shot. It's a 2-dose shot. And so far, we don't believe that there's sufficient information and communication around the fact that people will have to go for a follow-up shot. And just on the issue of vaccine manufacturers and delivery, at the beginning of the deliveries late last year and early this year, a lot of the vaccine manufacturers were saying, well, we can't deliver in millions of doses because supply is far less than demand. Is that still the reason?
So we would obviously disagree. We believe that there's a global demand. In fact, there's a global disparity. The WHO just this week, referred to it as quite a grotesque supply situation where millions of people in the global south still don't have enough supplies of vaccines. And we've seen that, definitely in South Africa. We've seen that playing out in countries like India as well. So I think there's definitely been a great demand for supplies. There just hasn't been sufficient supplies and there hasn't been sufficient sharing of the vaccine know-how and the knowledge to allow other manufacturers to scale up manufacturing so that we don't have a situation that we currently have in South Africa where you're waiting for 300,000 dosages to come, on an almost every second week basis. So there's a real problem and we believe a real supply chain crisis, but that crisis can be averted through, scaling up manufacturing across the world.
Let's quickly talk about the TRIPS waiver. You've been a proponent of that. India and South Africa have been pushing for that from far back as late 2020. The United States is now on board, but much of Europe, the EU, in fact, as a whole, is still opposed to that. Do you think it's basically dead in the water now and there's no point in hearing the issue at the World Trade Organization? So definitely not dead in the water. I think far from that. I think a momentum has been created with the Biden administration indicating support for a temporary waiver of the TRIPS agreements and provisions in relation to vaccines. Remember, the proposal was actually for all COVID-19 related technologies, not just vaccines. There's some movement from countries like New Zealand, including Canada. We've just had co-sponsors joining in the last week, supporting the proposal. So definitely, I think there is a moment where the EU is going to have a reckoning with itself. The faith-based organizations, civil society organizations in many European countries are calling on their governments to stop blocking the waiver and to actually support the proposal. Because really, time is against us. We have a global crisis on our hands. We have a crisis in South Africa, and time is actually not our friend at this particular moment.
And something that ties in with that was the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, saying that the wealthier countries, the likes of the US as well, who've already made so much progress in vaccinating adults, should in fact donate their doses instead of rushing to vaccinate teenagers and younger children.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our recent estimates in the last 72 hours is that the US is potentially sitting on at least about 1 billion surplus doses of vaccines. And so the call really is for countries that have over-ordered or over basically, purchase a number of different vaccines for their vaccination program, but they have reached critical adult coverage already, for them to donate all of those surplus supplies and the excess supplies to mechanisms such as COVAX, or to donate them through bilateral transfers. Because the situation that we have is less than 2% of people in the global south, in particular in Africa, have actually received a vaccine in their arm. And so the crisis that we're facing is that the limited time that we have now is to try and get as many vaccines into as many arms as possible, not just in South Africa, but also in the region.
Fatima Hassan, thank you so much for speaking to us. Fatima is head of Health Justice Initiative, speaking to us about the vaccine rollout.